I want to discuss this term, rapid onset gender dysphoria. And I want to talk about it because I was recently reading, I haven't finished the 400 and some pages from their review of evidence of best practices, but I started reading it and that term is used in there. And so I thought it was best, like, let's talk about what is rapid onset gender dysphoria? Why is it of concern for those that talk about it? What's the concern? And I also want to talk about what the evidence is against it and go from there. Okay. So, what rapid onset gender dysphoria is, it came from a study in 2017 by Elisa Littman. And what she did is she heard about these parents that were reporting their concern of their adolescent children that seemed to come upon feeling this way suddenly, that many times they reported their teenagers had shown no signs of any sort of gender dysphoria previously, and then all of a sudden seemed to have it. And so she did a study looking with a survey and sent it out 3 different websites where she knew parents were that had reported this and got about 164 people to do the survey. It was about 90 questions. Now, one thing about it is most of the people looked the same. It wasn't a very diverse group of people that were answering it. They were mainly females, mainly white, mainly about the same age, etc. Make that as well. And it was parent filled out about the experience, about the mental well-being, about the relationship with the child, and about the identity of the friend group, etc. And this is where it began of this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria from these parents saying this came on suddenly, I didn't see it coming. It was then further brought on by a paper that was published and then retracted, and I'll talk about why it was retracted, but it got out there and got people's attention by a Dr. Bailey and a Susanna Diaz. Now, Susanna Diaz is a pseudonym, and it was apparent that Dr. Bailey had met at some academic conference, and this parent had been collecting data about rapid onset gender dysphoria in some parent groups, and Dr. Bailey had encouraged this Susanna to publish it, and together they published the data. Now, the reason it was retracted is because they did not follow the rules of consent in getting the information. I don't know the details of it, but what I do know is Dr. Bailey admitted they did not follow the rules of consent of gathering this data, meaning most likely they weren't going through a scientific method of asking standardized questions. They probably were just gathering information from chat groups. And my understanding is they went into parents' groups specifically for parents that opposed gender affirming care for kids, and then collecting that data and then reporting it. So you can't read the paper. I can't read the paper because it had to be retracted. But there are some articles about that event being retracted. So this is a little bit about where the idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria came from. So the concern of rapid onset gender dysphoria is that adolescents are coming to the idea of being gender dysphoric because of the way their brains are impulsive, that it's because of peer pressure, because they often cite that many of their friend group are transgender as well, that there tends to be a higher number of transgender individuals considering the population as a whole, that it's an increasing rate among this group. There's a concern that there's a rush to receive medical transition care, that there is a concern for regret because of that rush, and that their impulsive brains at this age are making decisions without understanding the long-term effects, and that they're ignoring other factors that may be going on, such as mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, neurodivergence. These are not my words. These are the words of those that are supporters of the idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria, that there are other issues here that are not gender dysphoria and are being conflated, and that you need to treat the other issues and not the gender dysphoria, that if you treat the other issues, then there won't be gender dysphoria. That's the idea. Now, I want to just back up and show some understanding for the parents where that all began, these groups of parents that are like, what is going on? I've done this work with parents for, as I've mentioned, over a decade. And it's not an uncommon story to hear among the adolescent group that parents and guardians feel that when a child comes to them, especially an adolescent child comes to them and says, "Parents, I am a boy, I am a girl." And I'm going to stick to the binary right now. There's also I am non binary, but I'm going to stick to the binary for the purpose of this story. And when they come there and say, "This is who I am, and I want hormones," it feels very sudden, understandably, to parents. What is not seen is the time that this child has known this information, the time that the child has been trying to get the courage to tell their parents, the time that the child has struggled with their identity, that the child has tried to say, let me just stick it out as long as I can. Maybe I can live this way for my parents' sake until I get out of the house, or maybe I can stick it out as long as I can. And they've gotten to the point where they just can't do it anymore. So time for them has passed. They've also spent time doing research to see what is going on. Is there another way to be, especially when they are feeling hopeless? And they have done the research on what the options are. So they go in knowing. But there takes a lot of courage because many, along with the research on what are the medical options, if that is what they so desire, because not everyone who is transgender wants a medical transition. But they also know the stories of those that get kicked out of the house. They also know the stories of those that face physical abuse when they come out to their families. They know the stories of emotional abuse. So it takes a great amount of courage to weigh out, can I keep living this lie of who I am not, who everyone thinks I am, so that I don't get kicked out, so I don't face my worst nightmare of being rejected by those I love the most. And when that scale tips to, I can't do this anymore, I have to face that biggest fear, that is when many times it is with a sense of urgency. This is not the only story, this is not the only way it goes, but that is oftentimes why by the time they have the courage to tell their parents, their guardians, this is who I am, and I'm telling you this because I can't do this any longer and I'm ready for a medical transition. That it makes sense that the parents who have not seen this coming because the child has done the best that they could to hide it from them, to live the life that they think the parents want them to live, it makes complete sense that the parents feel this has come out of nowhere. Their world is going to be rocked, that they are going to experience a sense of loss and mourning, that they are going to question, that they are going to ask the question, why? Why is this happening? What is the reason? Is it the friend group? Is it some outside influence? How could this happen and I not know? They are all legitimate, reasonable questions. They are all questions I have heard many, many times. And I often tell parents, it makes complete sense that you would want to turn over every rock and every stone to find the answers, to make sense of things, to make certain before you move forward with something. And consider what else has been going on for your child. That it makes sense. It feels like this is all of a sudden for you. But is it possible it's not all of a sudden for them? And many times, with a little bit of conversation and discussion, it's been a long time for them. So that's the first thing, is this idea of rapid onset. Yes, it feels that way for parents and guardians, but it's not that way for the youth. The other thing, as I mentioned, is the concern is that there's a rush into care and then this decision is just made and then it's just gone into, right? That there's this rush to care. And the truth of the matter is that even before all the legislation in the states to block gender affirming care, the wait time to get into a gender affirming care clinic was in the order of months, 3, 6 months, usually to get into a clinic. That was way back before. Now we're talking months to years for a new patient to get in. I heard a director of one of the big gender affirming care clinics say in a talk that it's about 2 years from the time a child discloses their identity to a family until they are seen at their first visit. That doesn't mean they necessarily start medical transition at that time, but until they get to their first visit, 2 years. So this idea of rushing into care from the time of disclosure isn't even a realistic thing. Even before the legislation began, it wasn't a realistic thing. There were long wait times. I would consider months long wait times, especially as I mentioned many times when the kids are disclosing themselves. They've been waiting a long time already and they're ready to go. But now more than ever, the wait times are months to years. So there is no just go and medicine started right away. The other thing is these clinics are multidisciplinary. So there are therapists and physicians, and they all work together to understand, to look at those comorbidities that people were talking about that they're concerned about, to talk with the parents to understand what their concerns are, what other factors might be playing a role, to talk to the patient themselves to understand and to work it through with all of them. So there's no rapid onset treatment. And regarding the impulsive nature, there are some papers out there, psychology papers. I'm not a psychologist, I'll just say that out there, but that have discussed the adolescent brain and its impulsiveness. But that is the benefit of puberty blockers for the younger patients to give that wait time. So for those that it's appropriate to give puberty blockers, it gives them that wait time. That any sort of that extended time, which also is occurring with just the wait time to get into a clinic, that when you have that period of time to explore, to talk, and so even if you're waiting to get into a gender affirming care clinic, they may be able to see a therapist in that time, that it tends to erase the impulsiveness of decision making within an adolescent. My understanding from reading these papers, and these were papers specifically about adolescents making decisions on gender affirming care, that any sort of peer pressure that might influence decision making is possible, but is erased with that kind of delay, whether it's by puberty blockers or time delay that occurs. Well, there's the time it takes to get into a clinic or otherwise. And all of that, and we don't have to legislate it, it's already happening. It's happening within the clinics. And even if you didn't have a wait time within the clinics are aware of these factors and are taking it all into consideration as individual patients, with individual patients talking to them and finding out how long they've been exploring, finding out from the parents, finding out all the information and working as a team collaborating together, taking it on an individual basis. And I just want to stress that as patients, no matter what your health issue is, you want to be treated as an individual. You want to have your care individualized to you and your symptoms and your factors. And that is exactly what is done within gender affirming care and the clinics and the providers that provide the care. So, could an adolescent be influenced to explore their identity by their peers? Again, I'm not a specialist of therapy. I can't speak to that. I don't think that sounds like a crazy idea. However, the idea that medical transition is happening on a whim, that rapid onset gender dysphoria, and I think the idea that adolescents, because that's what this idea is around, adolescents medically transition, making changes to themselves and their body that they will regret later is not happening. The wait time alone to get care is long. And maybe that's the thing. I just realized as I'm saying this, nobody defines rapid. Like even the parents, when they say this happens so quickly, yeah, it feels that way, but define quickly. Now, I know from talking to many of these parents, it's like for them, quickly is that until that moment that their child said, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, there was no signs of it for them before that. And that's usually what they mean by quickly. But nobody really that talks about rapid onset gender dysphoria defines what they mean by rapid onset. It all came from just a group of parents saying this happened quickly. And based on that definition, okay. But many times when people try to discuss it in the medical literature, sometimes they talk about it as from the time of disclosure to the time of medical treatment. Sometimes they talk about it as the time of first demonstrating a gender expression and disclosure, or disclosure to a change in gender expression, or it's not really clear, but nobody anywhere has put a time frame on what rapid means. So even as I say, wait times just to get gender affirming care is long, maybe that's rapid to some people. I am not aware that you could get into any clinic before 6 months, but I don't know every single clinic's wait time. It's just the whisperings I hear around, and I actually haven't heard any for a long time, but I can't imagine anyone shorter than 6 months these days. I would guess they're longer. I can't imagine anyone considers that rapid. There is nothing wrong with questioning and wanting to be certain, to choose that a child in your care gets the best care they can. But in order to be able to make that choice, a family has to have the options that include the best care they can have. And so we have to be able to talk about what is actually going on. And although sometimes, from a parent's perspective, from an outside perspective, looking in, things may seem, quote, rapid. Nothing is happening rapid. That is why it is important to understand what is actually happening, and so that you can have your concerns addressed and we can talk and have a discussion about your concerns instead of fighting behind terms that don't exist. Instead, we can say, I'm really concerned that I feel like this is happening. What's really going on? Then we can have a discussion. Versus, I'm not listening to you because I know there's this thing called rapid onset gender dysphoria. I read it in a paper once. And if you don't acknowledge it, you must not know what you're talking about. I acknowledge that there are people that believe that's a thing, and I understand where it came from. It's a made up term. based on a researcher in 2017 that were looking at these parents that were saying, "Hey, what is going on? This seems to be going quickly." And it snowballed from there. Granted, that's my assessment. I will own it, but understanding and knowing the facts matter.